Hello and welcome to Bright Wings, children's books to make the heart soar. I am your host, Charity Hill. The purpose of this conversation is to help mothers and fathers identify books that will liberate their children to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. Let's say you know a multi-talented guy who happens to be married to one of your besties. He has already written a book, but it was nonfiction. He's written a new book, though, for teens this time, fiction. They'd like to send it to you and know what you think. But really, they say, no pressure. Would you feel pressure? How would you navigate that? I hope you enjoyed this interview with my friend and my bestie's husband, Devin Rose, the author of Chasing the Seeds, the first book of his new series, The Fiefdom Chronicles. Devin is a husband and father and a convert to Catholic Christianity from atheism and evangelical Protestantism. I met Devin's wife and our families became friends when we moved to Central Texas in 2019. Now he and his family live in Northeast Texas and they have a homestead. But this isn't the only thing that Devin has going on. He is a software engineer and he's made a mobile app for praying novenas. But he's also an author of both nonfiction and fiction work. Welcome to Bright Wings, Devin.
Thank you, Charity, and great to see you again.
So, Devin, I have to tell you, not all my friends write books, and not all books written by people I know might be worth reading. And so when y'all reached out to me that you'd written a book, I was curious, but a little nervous. You're very talented and creative. You're a good man, and you're married to my friend. But that still doesn't mean that, well, it didn't mean that your book was going to be good. I wanted to like your book. I was predisposed to liking your book, but I was a little nervous. Like, what if it isn't good? Like, what do I say? What do I say if I don't like it? But what's even funnier than that trepidation that I'm confessing to you is that I opened the book just kind of as soon as I got it in the middle of an afternoon after school and just began to read the opening paragraphs just to take a peek at the first sentence because I had a lit professor in college tell me that you could judge the quality of the whole book by its first sentence. And I just wanted to peek at the first sentence and reassure myself. And then I stayed up and I read the entire thing in one day.
Oh, I had no idea, Charity.
I couldn't put it down.
Wow. Well, so first of all, Charity, I'm honored too. In giving a book to a friend, I also wanted to know, there's no strings attached. In other words, because similarly, I've had people give me books, including friends, and I wasn't able to get into them. Sometimes the books weren't very good. And it's very hard to tell a friend, your book is not very good. How do you say that to a friend?
Yeah, how do you say that? So I was laughing at myself. I was delighted that your book was so readable and so engaging. I kept wondering if it was going to keep being so good, keep being so readable. And so I read until like 11 o'clock that night.
Wow. I mean, so I have a lot of questions for you, but first of all, Charity, I should say the book is called Chasing the Seeds.
Yes. And it's the first in the Fiefdom Chronicles. It's book 1. So this promises to be a series?
Yes, it promises to be a series. Of course, something could happen and it could not be a series. But I've already written the draft of book 2 and am just editing it. So we can talk more about, and I'm interested in talking more about like what the series is supposed to be. But back to what you said, my wife, who is your good friend, said, you don't know how to write, basically you don't know how to write fiction. Do you think you can actually write a book? And I told her, I said, I don't know. I tried to write a fiction book maybe 10 years ago and I failed at it. And I'm not exaggerating. I stopped writing it and it's just sitting, in a bin on my computer because it wasn't very good. And I was lost. I didn't know what to do. So I told her, I don't know. And I wrote the book and she said, well, is anyone, basically going to read this book? And I said, I don't know. So we had many conversations about whether it's worth writing even one book, let alone a whole series of books that people may or may not read, which is a fair question to ask.
Well, the good news is I like it in all authenticity, Devin. I really do. I think it succeeds. And my children are getting into it as well. So they've been sneaking it when they're supposed to be doing their homework. So that's great news.
Oh man, they better keep up with their studies. They have a strong headmaster, you know. Well, and by
Yeah.
the way, so Charity, I know that we're
Yeah.
kind of jumping around. We haven't even gotten to what the book's about, which I want to get to. And I know you do, but your children, I would assume that these would the ones who might be interested would be your teenage age children.
Yes. So my 13-year-old and my 16-year-old, yeah, they were most keen on it. And it was actually the 16-year-old who was reading it when she was supposed to probably be writing a paper for me because I'm also her teacher this year. So but she was sick. And so maybe that's her excuse.
Well, and so speaking of, I intended this book for adults or for teenagers,
Yeah.
and adults could decide what 14, 15, 16. The book does have violence in it, so you know some parents might be sensitive to that.
If you would tell us about
I,
Chasing the Seeds, the Fiefdom Chronicles,
the
book
Fiefdom Chronicles.
one.
Yeah, so book
So tell us
one,
about it, Devin.
main character Edmund, who's a 20-something-year-old computer programmer from Austin, Texas. He discovers a weird riddle in one of his father's old books. So his father had a library of books. It's an economics book. His father didn't write it. It was just a book his father had. His father died when he was 12 years old. You know, he's kind of has mixed memories about that. Well, this riddle seems like a clue, and it sets him off on a scavenger hunt that ends up spanning the globe, finding clue after clue that his father has left him. He thinks that these clues somehow have to do with his father's legacy, the mystery around his father's death. It turns out all of that's true. And if it were just, of course, there wouldn't be much of a story other than interesting if he followed the clues and he found out what he wanted to find out. But there's a rogue FBI agent who also is interested in the clues because that FBI agent happens to know something about them. So he starts chasing Edmund along with Edmund's best friend. They're going together. Edmund's an atheist. His best friend is a Catholic. And then the villain is, it doesn't say what the villain is. He's an atheist because he's a bad guy. He doesn't have any morals or scruples.
He's
So,
a bit of a nihilist. He's actually a very consistent nihilist, seems like to me.
well, and if you're going to be a nihilist, you might as well be consistent about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing matters. Only just be having
Power.
power. Yeah. So, they meet some other people along the way, but that's the story of this chase and search for his father's clues.
Devin, one of the things I wonder about is what got you started writing this book that is, I don't know, young adult fiction, perhaps. I think it falls in the young adult fiction genre. Do you have
Yeah,
a backstory on the book's genesis and composition?
yeah, totally. And like I said, I wanted adults to be able to read it, but it also I wanted young adults to be able to read it. I have a 14-year-old son, so about the same age as your older children, and probably like your children, he's read everything. And yeah, I could, set him on Chaucer and Canterbury Tales and Beowulf and all kinds of stuff that maybe he'll get to, but he's read all the popular stuff. So, oh well, have you read Narnia? Oh, you read Lord of the Rings? Oh, have you read, insert the series? And I thought, well, I want something for him to read. But a lot of times you go and find some books to read, and there's problems, right, in those books. There's problems from, the morality that's portrayed in it. Something evil is portrayed as good or as neutral. There could be profanity in it. There could be blasphemy in it. Matter of fact, there was a series I liked. I call it the Boys Little House on the Prairie series. Gave it to a friend to read, or didn't give it to him, but talked with them about it and suggested it. And they said, well, in that book, a lot of the characters take the Lord's name in vain a lot. I don't want my children reading that. And I kind of said, yeah, it wasn't, but it's not. It's kind of frowned upon in the book. The characters doing that are like the rough characters. It's sort of an old west. And she said, yeah, but I don't want that for my children. So, that's a judgment call, but I wanted something that he could read. And a lot of stuff in the young adult, as you know, is I mean, all of this paranormal stuff, all of this, I don't even want to say vampire and weird powers and inappropriate sexual relationship type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, young adult literature, people think it means that the writing quality or something about that level of book is better than middle grade fiction, but actually middle grade fiction tends to be what you would use to describe a book quite like Chasing the Seeds. Perhaps a little bit, maybe mostly middle grade would have less, maybe less violence, and it would not have the romance that begins to develop between two adults. In terms of, it's not dark, it's not psychologically sort of twisted or complicated. So it shares those clean features of middle grade, that there's nothing dark or twisted, and the relationship between the couple is really pure. But because it's about two adults, that would put it in the young adult category. And middle grade has violence, but this has people actually die. But it's clean like a middle grade book. Was that on that? So that was on
Well,
purpose. Is that
well,
what
it
you're
it was
saying here? You're proposing that you kind of did this intentionally.
yes. So actually, what's great hearing you say this, Charity, because you actually know a lot more about children's fiction than I do. In hearing you say that, so that was intentional, but I actually did not have those categorizations in mind.
Yeah.
I didn't know those categorizations kind of existed, but that's exactly what it was. If you could lift middle grade fiction that doesn't have something weird into young adult, then
Yes. That's where your book fits.
that's where it fits. And
Yeah.
not to mention, sometimes you read stuff too. Like we've got good books from that are written by, oh, but it's written by a Protestant guy. And so there's nothing Catholic about it, or it's written by a Mormon. So I looked at multiple series and it's like, oh, this one's by a Protestant, this one's by a Mormon. And sometimes they're going to be inserting their own theological ideas into it. Let's put it that way. And I'll be inserting in this series right Catholic theological ideas. So a Mormon or a Protestant ultimately might not like Chasing the Seeds, even though the character begins as an atheist and he ends as an atheist in the book. In the series, he's
We'll see
hint
what
hint.
happens.
Yeah, he might have, he meets a young woman who's Catholic and his best friend's Catholic. Maybe there's going to be something that happens there.
While the Catholic feature I know is very intentional from you, it's also very plot driven. I mean, these Catholics who are supporting him during a time of uncertainty and danger and fear, and whatever is being brought up regarding Catholicism, Devin seems to me to really involve what's going on in the character as a vehicle for his growth in relationship with these people and his own questions about his identity. So, Devin, obviously you're Catholic, but you're also trying to write a book that's believable on its own terms. Why does Catholicism develop Edmund as a character? And so, for example, your main character, Edmund, has nearly no family. He's got one friend, no history. He's an independent guy, kind of a loner, is an introvert. I love all the tech. The tech world so well, and I find it really amusing the way you write about the tech world. By the way, but also the book has people with great family connections and community sense of community. His best friend, the young woman that he becomes interested in. These are characters that have hearty received faith. They're people who are from a tradition. I think that's appealing to a broad swath of the population. But I wonder why did you pick out Catholicism to carry that sense of faith and community and tradition?
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously, I'm biased toward it because, like you said, I am Catholic. And even though this is a question that you might ask, and in the very front of the book is like on all fiction books, this is all coincidental. There's no person this is based on. You know, don't don't try to picture that this is some specific person we're portraying. At the same time, of course, you're writing based on things that you've experienced or seen. And Edmund, the main character, well, I was a 20-year-old computer programmer who was an atheist. I didn't have much of a family
Oh,
and had loner tendencies. Now, my dad wasn't killed. I'm sorry, my dad didn't die. And maybe I wasn't as much of a loner as Edmund is. But when I saw other families, including and especially ones who were religious, growing up as a young man when I wasn't Catholic, wow, I was drawn toward that. They had a, conviviality, a family culture, joy and hope, and all these things that I found very appealing. So, in the book, then it's like, yes, Edmund, part of his, character arc, if you will, in this story and throughout the series will be, yeah, he's coming from this place of, isolation, you might say. He doesn't believe in God. He's been burned in his life. His dad was kind of MIA. Well, now though, he, with his friend and this young woman, there's these more vibrant families who are Catholic. And there's a Protestant guy in it too, who ends up being his mentor. So, Protestants don't despair. Um, but that Catholic life that he sees is very appealing to him, just as it was to me before I ultimately became Catholic.
Yeah, this giant sense that you are not alone, that you're part of something that has come before you and is going to exist after you, and that you're in that stream of life and richness and faith tradition.
Right. Versus, I remember when I learned about nihilism, I was a sophomore in high school. It was in English class, and we had to read all these nihilistic stories and learn about it. So it was like Albert Camus' The Stranger. And one of the things he said in that book that I remember, because I was an atheist when I read it, is if we're all going to die, it's obvious that how and why don't matter.
Wow.
Right. Utterly hopeless. The villain he's that way, but it's like, yeah, it's the ultimate disconnection. It's all absurd. Right.
That perfectly describes the motivations and decision making process of that FBI agent, the rogue FBI agent. He's scary. I would not want to
It,
be chased by him. He's
well, and
scary.
in one of the, one of the things you said, Charity, about like targeting it was I wanted to make him scary, but it's a fine line then where he becomes psychologically creepy in a way
That's
that's
true.
disturbing.
He's not psychologically creepy in a way that is going to haunt my sleep.
Yeah. um,
I
but that
could
is,
sleep.
yeah, good, which is good.
He's not
It,
twisted, but he's just very selfish and very power hungry.
right. And he's
Wants to
willing,
control people.
yes, and he's willing to do, like, we have moral limits on what we are willing to do, right? A lot of moral limits. I just can't come and slap that person at the grocery store because they bothered me or something, let alone like kill someone who's in my way. You're in my way. I'm going to do this to you. And so when you think about a bad guy who doesn't have those moral limits, and maybe because let's say he is employed by, in this case, the FBI, well, there's a legal umbrella that he has immunity, impunity.
Access, protection. He has access to their tools.
Right.
Yes.
Which, as the book gets into, it ends up going into this idea of, ooh, okay, if these people who work at the three-letter agencies like the CIA, FBI have access to these tools, well, we know that people are people, and we're all inherited original sin. We're concupiscence. We're not perfect. Well, now I can spy on anyone in the world. Man, even if I'm a good guy, a quote good guy, kind of like the ring of the one ring, in Lord of the Rings. Well, that might corrupt me, even if I think I'm using those tools for good. Where's the line drawn?
Yeah. And what's my price?
Or even what if I'm told to do it? Right. Well, my supervisor told me to do it. And we don't have to get to current events, but people, like, there's different people who are being prosecuted by the Department of Justice under the FACE Act for pro-life people. And it's kind of like, ooh, well, if you're an FBI agent, you're told, hey, go to that pro-life person's house. Yeah, they have 7 children. You kick down their door, at 2 a.m. and you get the guy and you drag him out, or the woman. Are you going to do that? And I think I'd like to think I would say, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. Well, you're going to be fired then, right? And there goes your career and your pension and everything. So the book's not about this, obviously, but it does bring up those broader questions of we now hear of the deep state or the administrative state and the power that it has now.
That rogue FBI agent he has a particular worker under his thumb that reports to him. He gets him to get permission for all kinds of shady things.
Yes, yes, and he'll be in the second book too.
I'm so glad.
Well, and he ends up trying to. He realizes, like, I don't want to work with this bad FBI agent anymore. I don't want to do that. But it's not so easy to get away from the bad guy when they want you to stay.
uh So for my listeners, I think a good analogy for Devin's book, Chasing the Seeds, in its style, it reminds me a lot of Gordon Corman in terms of it has lots of action, has a certain amount of reflection, it's clean, it's meaningful. There's actually character development happening to Edmund, the main character, probably to a degree that's not really happening in Gordon Corman books, perhaps. So that is something I appreciate as well about Chasing the Seeds. And then, as we mentioned already, it's clear there's a clear distinction between good and evil, which I appreciate as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that was a big one too, because as you know, only when children reach a certain age, especially when they're younger, it has to be very clear like, here's a good guy and here's a bad guy. Not, and it's so popular in modern times. It's like, all the different movies that now are rehabilitating all of the evil, wicked characters. Um, Even in, one that's now one that's like being done about Tolkien's world. Well, the orcs in Tolkien's world, they're not really bad. Actually, they have a families and they don't want to go to war. That just came
What?
out recent. Yes,
Oh, come
I
on.
kid you not. It's like,
That
no.
what? Oh, come on. You cannot have sympathy for orcs. I mean, they're like demons,
That's right.
practically.
Well, but that's what all these great stories from our childhood and before, they are being taken and co-opted, as you know, and the bad guys are becoming good. Now, of course, a bad guy can become good in a radical change. And in popular culture, I'd say that Darth Vader in the Star Wars series, right? Darth Vader ends up saving Luke, and he has a conversion at the very end. So it's like, yeah, but leading up to that time, he was a bad guy.
I think, Devin, there's just so much more. There's so much behaviorism going on where people are just the result of their circumstances, the result of their environments. And what I don't like about that is it doesn't make me responsible for my actions. And I am. My actions make me into a certain kind of person. I have a certain nature. And I think what's going on with orcs is really messed up because orcs are meant to be a certain kind of creature, meant to be pointed toward evil in that way that elves are pointed toward light. You can't rehabilitate an orc. It's not circumstantial that they're an orc or that they're bad.
Right. Well, and I sent that to a good friend of mine who is not Catholic, who's equally loved the Tolkien's world. And I said, come on, right? Like, what would you say? Well, he's been very defensive about these modern shows. And he said, well, the orcs were twisted versions of elves at one time. So, and I was like, come on, no, right? In Tolkien's world, they are evil, and they're it's senseless to try to like you said, make it where, oh, you can't be evil. It's just you're a victim of your own circumstance and environment.
Yeah. So let's get back to Chasing the Seeds. I want to know more about. Can we talk about some of the conspiracy theories you've laced the book with?
Sure. Yeah. Tell me. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
So several conspiracy theories that are currently popular are elements of the plot. I don't even really know them, but it's fun. Okay, so let's see. Edmund mentions preppers. So Edmund, your main character, creates an app that allows people to actually communicate privately, chat, message each other, even then phone calls, message each other and call each other utterly privately.
Right.
And that's what puts him on the government radar, is because he has created something that allows people to have private conversations that can't be tracked or overheard.
Yes.
Well, I have a limited vocabulary when it comes to technological things like this, Devin.
Sure,
so
that's totally.
You might
fine.
have to speak for me or use the right vocabulary. So Edmund, the character, has created this app that allows people to talk privately, communicate privately. So I was learning also about the U.S. government's ability to surveil social media and texts and phone calls as I read. So some of the basis of the story is not fictional, but nevertheless, Edmund has created a communication app which he calls Fiefdom. And he's just made it for fun. He just made it because he thought there was a use for it. And immediately, Fiefdom starts getting attention. And he thought it'd be a nice app that was really popular with a small group of people, people like preppers, anarcho capitalists, libertarians, and cryptocurrency enthusiasts. Now, maybe you know something about one of those groups, like me. I wish I
So,
was a closet prepper. I kind of find it appealing.
well,
Everybody wants to be prepared.
see, actually, exactly, Charity. Let me come at it from this perspective. We are all preppers on a scale, right? On a spectrum. Even when I look at books that you have all these great books. Well, why do you want to have a bunch of books? Well, for one thing, you actually have all this knowledge at your fingertips in your house.
Mm.
And what if all those books went away or they were shut down or whatever, they were banned? Well, you actually have those. So that's obviously one aspect of preparation.
Yeah.
And one,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's not the, hey, we have a bunker where we've got a year's worth of food. But I've kind of come to realize, oh, okay, yeah, to be a prepper has this connotation, this stigma, but really it's just, hey, I want to be ready for what may happen to my family. I, as the husband and father who have to protect and provide for them, need to take reasonable steps in that way. And that will look different for every family. As you know, we moved from central Texas up to northeast Texas where we have a homestead. So you might start to get the idea that some of these prepper ideas, I sympathize with.
But that's just it. Chances are that anyone listening or reading shares at least one element of sympathy with one of the groups that is interested in the fiefdom app. So I might have prepper sympathies, but that also makes me curious about some of these other people that are interested in the fiefdom app. So it creates intrigue.
The thing with some of these conspiracy theories too, in the past 4 years, with the events of the past 4 years, we've seen some conspiracy theories kind of come true. That doesn't mean they're all true, or that doesn't mean that everything that someone concocts is true. But I do think what we've seen is even quote regular people like us have started looking at things and saying, hey, wait a second. What is the government doing there? Or what are those companies doing? With regard specifically to like surveillance, this was the thing that Edward Snowden, do you remember him? He worked for the NSA, and about 10 years ago, I don't know, 12 years ago, something, he basically said, hey, look, the government, we're using all these tools not to just spy on terrorists and people outside the country.
But just
We're
tons of ordinary citizens.
Yes,
Everybody could be spied on.
everyone.
That's
And
right. And he
so
had to flee to Russia, didn't he?
that's
Our enemy.
correct.
I mean, maybe not our enemy. I don't know.
Yeah, well, someone's enemy. So, right. So, like, this was a bombshell revelation at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And instead of the government saying, hey, you're right, we're going
We
to
should
change,
stop.
right? They instead said, we're catching you and we're going to throw you in jail, for the rest of your life. Well, he had this daring escape through Iceland, ended up in Russia, was one of the few countries who would, take him and not extradite him, where he ended up getting married. Now he has a family and he's living there. Obama famously had this press conference where he said, Edward Snowden, don't be afraid. Come on back to the U.S. and we'll talk. We'll talk about things. Meaning he'll have a sham trial and he'll go to jail for the rest of his life. Well, he didn't take Obama up on that. When that was revealed, then what we've seen over the past 10 years is the government basically forces companies to divulge information to them. And it's not like they have to get a warrant like you normally would. They have all these secret courts that are called FISA courts. And they can say, hey, we think that Devin is a bad guy. He's
on this
want
podcast with this really eccentric person.
Yes.
We need to keep tabs on him.
And therefore we can now because they have back doors and they can force companies, the telecom companies and Facebook and everyone else, to basically give the information. And those companies have to do it because it's a legal order. If they say no, the government can basically shut them down. So understandably, I'm not saying it's good. The companies say, here you go. Here's his emails. Here's his phone records. Here's all his information. And the normal response from regular people like us is, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have to be afraid of that. Well, but you can imagine under the hands of someone who's bad or nefarious or just doesn't like you, right? Or maybe doesn't like Catholics. Doesn't matter if you're not, quote, doing anything wrong.
Or doesn't like your dad in this case.
Right.
Sorry to give away a plot point.
No, but that's part of it. Yeah, the FBI knew something about his dad, and therefore they could spy on Edmund and get information from him. So this was a conspiracy theory 10 years ago that they could spy on us in this way, and they were. Now it's not. Now it's actually a known fact, and the government doesn't apologize for it, and it's not been rolled back.
Yeah, it hasn't been rolled back. And Devin, that's why Chasing the Seeds is so gripping. It relies on certain compelling and disconcerting facts, facts which move the plot.
So in the book, this FBI agent actually comes to Edmund and said, "Hey, that's a neat app. We want you to install a back door so that we can. It can't be completely private because that's not allowed, right? We have to be able to know what you're doing with it." One other thing, and then we can talk about maybe some other aspects of this. But one other thing is, I think we've all seen too. Nowadays, it's like you might go to your bank and say, "I want to withdraw money." And they're like, "Well, what are you going to use it for?" What do you mean? It's my money. Oh, well, no, now they ask questions. And if it's over a certain amount, we've all seen this too. It's like, well, you can't withdraw that amount. What do you mean? Or if you try to go somewhere with a certain amount of money, that gets flagged. So we've slowly, and if you had told that to our parents or grandparents, hey, when you go to the bank, they're going to like grill you about what you're going to do with your money. They would not be able to have believed that that was the case. Now we're like, yeah, the government, the banks, whatever. So it's some conspiracy stuff.
It is so interesting, Devin. You're right. We are really comfortable with people looking over our shoulder. And maybe perhaps because we're used to oversharing, we've gotten comfortable with strangers knowing our business, but then we retract and have a desire for privacy. And nobody wants to be watched when they don't think they're being watched. Nobody wants to be peeped at. And I think Chasing the Seeds, I think you wrote a book that taps into all of these dynamics. I think across the United States, people have a lot of skepticism or have developed mistrust with government, with big businesses, with healthcare, privacy, free speech, diversity of ideas, religious freedom. So your book plays on these themes in a way that is delightful. It is a little bit tense, but believable and logical too. And then, too, you have all these different groups across the country, the preppers, the anarcho capitalists, the Bitcoiners, who all have their take and they all have their own solution for the problems, too. Your book captures all that interest and enthusiasm and concern.
Yes, and so it's Charity, like you pointed out, this is a very modern book, as in it's the here and now in a sense. It's not. It's probably not. It'll probably read differently in 100 years than it does today,
Yeah, yeah,
which I'm okay with. I wanted to write something that kind of spoke to those contemporary issues, if you will,
yeah.
including, and as you know, the cryptocurrency plays a big role in this book. With one of the characters, not being that interested in it, his Edmund's not really super interested. His
But
friend
his
Robert,
friend is.
right? So his friend Robert has, some Bitcoin, and it ends up coming in handy. One thing too with this, because I don't mind admitting I like cryptocurrency. I think Bitcoin is a good project or a good thing, and so I'm also in that community of Bitcoin crypto people, most of whom I'd say are not Catholic, maybe not Christian at all. And I wanted to give them something too. This book's a little bit of a Trojan horse. I wanted to get them interested in a story that has to do with the thing they like, which is Bitcoin. And maybe throughout the story, then, if they get hooked, they come to encounter these Catholic principles, the Catholic Church, and the truth of the universe. It might lead to Bitcoiners embracing the full truth. I don't say that to Bitcoiners. I'm saying it to you.
Yeah, it's for us to know and for them to find out.
So it might get Catholics like into Bitcoin, and it might get Bitcoin into Catholic.
Yeah, I'm like, I was super skeptical about Bitcoin. It did not surprise me when it crashed.
Charity, what do you think it's crashed down to now, though?
I have no idea.
Charity,
But now I know who to call when I have questions about Bitcoin,
no,
Devin.
you do, but I want to. This is a good thing, though, Charity. Charity, if you had to guess, what is the price of one Bitcoin right now?
No idea.
But it's crashed. So it's. What do you think? I mean, what is a Bitcoin worth? It's crashed.
Yeah, 5 cents.
You think it could be 5 cents?
I have no clue.
Okay, so Charity, do you know how much Bitcoin is worth right now?
Who's being interviewed?
I am, but this is a good thing.
What is Bitcoin worth right now, Mr. Rose?
It's worth approximately $57,000 per Bitcoin.
That's crazy.
Now, what's funny is, Charity, we need to have this conversation when book two, three, four, five come out. This could be a 5 book series, by the way.
All right.
Let's, if by book, two or three, we talk and Bitcoin is like 150,000 or 200,000. That's what I'm going to be talking to your husband about, the need to buy some Bitcoin.
I agree. Let's do
Okay.
that. Okay. We need to have a separate conversation about Bitcoin, evidently. But what this does show is that it's so easy for someone who's interested in one aspect of your book to share concerns and sympathies with other groups mentioned in your book.
Yes, but your listeners are going to like that. Okay, right? They might not be Bitcoiners, and they hear this, and they're like, "Whoa, that's interesting, huh?"
It is interesting. Yeah, definitely intrigued by other elements in this story.
By the way, Charity, I had help with this book. I got a great book called, I think I might have it here. It's called Story Engineering. It's basically here's how you craft a fiction story. The downside of the book is he draws heavily on Dan Brown of the Da Vinci Code. Y'all remember that?
Yeah. Mm.
Right. Which guess what? Like it sold, I don't know, tens of millions of copies, right? Hundreds of millions of copies. This awful book, and it was the movie. So terrible, blasphemous, evil. But the way he crafted the story followed the classic formula. And so there's a classic formula for how you make a story. And if you follow that pattern, the story at least will make sense. It needs to have these certain elements. It still might not be a good story. It might be full of trash or whatever, or it might not be well written. But in following that, that at least gave me the outline for, oh, this is what has to happen at certain times in the book.
Devin, you are so inventive. It is kind of stunning. So my husband wondered, he's like, did Devin read a book on how to write a book?
Your husband is right.
he How could he do that? How could he do that? I'm not saying he's jealous, but he was definitely impressed. And
Well, yeah.
I love knowing that Connor was right about you, that you did have this. I mean, it is good storycraft. It is well written. It's not Dante, it's Devin, but
Yes.
it's adventuresome, good, thoughtful. That's very interesting. Yeah, because the storycraft of it is very good.
Well,
Yeah.
Charity, thank you. And your husband, I don't know if we say your husband's name was right on. This book, Story Engineering, is the one I use. There's others that are like it. And some people also write books differently. Some people write by the seat of their pants and they just organically write. And then they come back in and they can make sure that they still make sure it's organized according to this classical outline.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that they write it is not just through an outline. They just start writing. I definitely had to have an outline. And then I had an Excel spreadsheet with every single scene and what the purpose of the scene was. I needed that. Now, one person in a review said, is to your point about this isn't Dante, which you're absolutely right. There's no flowery prose in this book. There's like the minimum of scene in what the characters are wearing description, and then it's just what happens.
No, but it's so funny. The minimum amount of description. So it's a very guy book. All the listeners and readers out there know is like, in a certain sense, I kept being struck by the fact that this was like a very masculine guy book because there is like a minimal amount of description. You are definitely dealing with a male character. Most of the characters are male in the book, and there's not a lot of sentimentality. There is some self-reflection and there is character development, which you want to see. Edmund's not a static character. He does develop, but he's not brooding over his thoughts and his emotions and his feelings at any point, really.
Yes.
It's
right. And about that, it's interesting, Charity, because I am a man. It's hard for a man to write a female character that's really good and believable. I think there's a reason why, like, I mean, I'm just going to say something. Call like Jane Austen the greatest English novelist of female characterization, or a brilliant novelist of female characterization. Well, she also, of course, was a woman.
Well, Devin, I do think it takes a particular kind of man. I think Michael O'Brien from Canada and Wendell Berry. But yeah, I grant your point.
I think it's challenging to portray kind of the inner thoughts, of a woman in an accurate way. And there's no scene in this first book from the point of view of the female character, whose name's Bridget. In a subsequent book, there will be. So something will be written from her perspective. And I'm going to be honest, I'm actually going to rely heavily on my wife, just as your husband would rely on you, to read it and to make suggestions for how it's portrayed from inside the female mind and heart.
Looking outward from her perspective.
How is she evaluating, in this case, Edmund? Edmund has some good qualities, but he also has some that are not very masculine or not very good. How does a woman evaluate a man when considering, is this guy,
that, yeah, he's underdeveloped in a few categories.
Yeah. And I don't mind telling you, do you mind if I spoil something for this later in the series?
No, go ahead.
Ultimately, if the books continue, the main character, Edmund and Bridget, are going to get married. So Edmund needs to become Catholic first. But then he has to show Bridget, the female character, that he's a real man. He needs to, if you just become Catholic, but your whole life you've been atheist, how long does it take you to become who God wants you to be? It could take a while, right? What would a woman, and actually, Chair, I might end up asking you and my wife, well, what would it take if a man had just become Catholic and you saw some promising characteristics in him? But what would it take for you to say, is this guy going to become a saint? Is he really following through? These are open questions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would be looking for some stability and depth. How deep is this change? How far has it taken hold of him? Has it impacted his habits? Does he love the good? Does he love Jesus more than he loves me? Maybe that's the clincher. I would want to see it become reliably part of his character.
And what if you, because you've grown up Catholic or been Catholic a long time, what if you know way more about the faith than he does for a long time? You know what I mean? Like, he just became Catholic. He's having to learn stuff. You've been immersed in it.
Yeah, some of that I think comes down to personality. Some women would find that bothersome, and some women would find that fresh.
I don't need no intellectual guy here who's no, just joking.
Like, oh, Bridget seems, I don't know, she seems like a good woman. She's probably better than me. She might have more time for that than me.
She is, in the book, Bridget is considering religious life.
Right. How is he going to persuade her that he's the vocation?
Right. And in part, that's because as you know, Charity, I think this will be uncontroversial. In a real sense, religious life is considered a higher vocation than marriage. Most people are called to marriage, but renouncing marriage for the sake of the kingdom in the priesthood religious life is like you're already, in a sense, living, the eschatological kingdom. Bridget gets in her mind, which I think some women could, or even young men, well, it's better to be a priest or nun. That's like the highest calling. Don't I want to do the highest thing? Don't I want to give God my very best? What do you think about that mindset?
I think it's a really real thing that young people can struggle with who really love Jesus and want to give God everything. They want to give him all their time. They want to have a life of prayer, very beautiful. They want a life of holiness. They want to be totally devoted to him. They want to be devoted to him and their flesh. It used to kind of irk me that the Council of Trent said that religious life is objectively superior, is actually the language, objectively superior to marriage. And the sources for that understanding are, of course, Jesus' own life, the writings of St. Paul, and the witness of the church fathers. But that objective superiority shouldn't bother me. Let me tell you why. It's objectively better because of what it points to. Religious life doesn't make sense on its own apart from Jesus. It doesn't make sense. Why not get married? That is to say, from the outside, it could look like married people are interested in each other. Obviously, no one becomes a priest or a nun except for Jesus, right? And so their life points to him in a dramatic way. And that is especially the reasoning behind its objective superiority is as a sign, it's very clear what it's pointing to. Priesthood and religious life are a sign of the fulfillment of the kingdom. That's my favorite understanding of that objective superiority. Now, something can be objectively superior, and still not be for me. If I'm not called to religious life, it's not objectively superior for me. And the church herself says, if you're not called to it, you better not do it.
Right. That's a great way to describe it.
And
Actually, I need to write that down.
Harder. Oh, thanks. Yeah, just because it's harder doesn't make it better.
Right. Especially if you're not called to it. You're called to marriage.
Right.
Right. So Bridget doesn't have the theological background that you do, and she has to get that distinction in mind between the objective good and the subjective. I just wrote that down.
Yeah. Thanks, grad school. So there was one word in the book, Devin, that didn't fit. I'm going to tell you about it because I think it's cheeky of me.
Oh, I want you to tell me this word.
It's when Edmund is describing his friend. Actually, it's not Edmund describing his friend Robert, but Robert's being described as Edmund's friend, and the word dear is used. And I was like, a dude would not describe his friend with dear.
The word dear is used. What's funny is I'm trying to remember. And by the way, Charity, I'm not blaming this on my editor, but my editor is a woman.
She missed it. I knew.
Well, she missed it, or she might have. I don't think she would have inserted that or added it in her edits.
That's funny. Yeah.
But yeah, dear is a little too sensitive for a man to use. Well, did you ever hear this, Charity? It's by one of these famous English people about the perfect word. I don't know if it was. I'm making up names. It was, and it's basically like the perfect word, right? Is in a story or what you're writing, that is, you always want to get it. And if you don't get that perfect word, in this case, it's just not a good word at all, let alone not a perfect word. But even if you have a good word and there's a perfect word to use and you didn't use it, it's the sentence doesn't have the same oomph to it.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I just had, when I saw that word, I was like, and that is the only thing that makes me giggle.
Yeah. Well, and it took you out of the book, and it made you think about it as a reader.
That's what it was. It took me slightly out of the book. Yep. That's very interesting.
Well, and this is where, so my wife Catherine did not, she was not so keen on this book, in me writing it. I don't think it's wrong for me to say that. I understand she had doubts about it, but she didn't read it before. So she didn't proofread it, or she didn't read through it. So it actually did not get that feedback. she might have caught something like that, but she only read it afterwards when some other people were like, "Hey, this book was pretty good," and she's like, "Oh, well, I guess I'll read it." It's like, I was like, "Sure."
Thanks, Catherine.
Right, here's a cop,y It's just published.
Yeah, just hot off the press for you.
Yeah, so it was only my the editor, who's a Catholic woman, who I would say is a grandma age, and she's an author herself, and a great woman, but she was really good. And I had to have an editor too, because I needed someone to read it, and I told her, I said, you need to be very blunt. If this whole thing is no good, and the way that I write it is no good, save me a few years of my life of writing a series of books, and just tell me that it's no good. And instead she said, rather, I think, kind of like what you said, have confirmed or affirmed, Charity. No, there's some good stuff here. It's you know what I mean? Like, you can do this. And I even ended up, I never heard of this publisher. It's a small publisher who publishes Catholic and Eastern Orthodox compatible fiction. I never heard of them. They're very small. She said, you should submit it to them. So they were the only publisher I was going to submit to. And I did submit to them. They thought about it, and we went back and forth for 6 months. And ultimately they passed on it, which I think was good, because one, most of their audience, I believe, and almost all their authors are women. So they're heavily female. And as you said, women can read this book, but it's very masculine. And then two, it's a series. So a first-time fiction author, and you're taking a gamble that this guy's going to write a series, like, Ooh, that's kind
Maybe
of tough.
not. Yeah. Yeah. But they clearly did not know with whom they were contending. Devin Rose.
I'm
This is
well,
funny.
and I don't have any ill feelings toward them. And as a matter of fact, me and several of the people in that publishing house are in. There's a thing called the Catholic Writers Guild. It's an online community and forum. You can join it for however, $40 or $50 a year. I joined that to get some like feedback and some fellow Catholic authors. So they're in that. And so we actually end up kind of crossing paths online. And they have an annual conference. You're writing children's or nonfiction or fiction is something that, if you're a Catholic author, you could consider.
It sounds like a good source of literary community. Devin, this has been such a fun conversation. I've loved hearing about Chasing the Seeds, the Fiefdom Chronicles, book one. I'm really looking forward to more. It's fast paced, it's complicated, there are plot twists, there's character development, and it's masculine. I love all these dimensions you've woven together, and it's good to know that there's more to come. Your first book of fiction? Is this your first book of fiction?
This is the first book.
All right. So congrats on your first YA fiction book.
Thank you, Charity. And the next book, when it comes out, I'll send you a copy and there will be no strings attached.
Perfect. If you're looking for your copy of Chasing the Seeds, there is a link in the show notes.